The United States government is one of the largest providers of credit in the world.
We're talking $5 trillion, larger than the GDP of most nations in loans and loan guarantees that are made through more than 100 different programs.
And with that huge portfolio comes fragmented systems, rising fraud risks, but a lot of well-intentioned people trying to hold it all together with digital duct tape.
These programs are critically important to keep the nation's economy humming and to help Americans at critical junctures of their financial lives.
Welcome to the Lending Brief. I'm Robert Shea.
And I'm Doug Crisatello. We're going to talk with the people who actually know what's working, what needs to improve, and what will it take to bring federal lending into the 21st century.
Now, Doug, I know you know this, but this was before your time. We haven't been doing this long enough to have return guests. Kate, Abby, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be back.
So you were former CFO of the Small Business Administration, and I thought we did a great episode, but are you here for a redo?
I brought a friend.
Oh.
Yeah.
I see that. You want to introduce him?
Yeah, this is Steve Kaczarski. He's a mentor of mine in many ways and was the CIO and held many other positions at SBA for years. So, Steve, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. And I'm glad Kate brought me along. So this is exciting. I listened to the first couple podcasts and learned something and then enjoyed them. So yes, as Kate said, I was 27 years at SBA and CIO, Chief AI Officer, and led tech and modernized tech through the Office of Capital Access, through all the good times and the challenging times, from the beginning stages of Recovery Act and Jobs Act through to our pandemic responses and everything in between. So it's been an exciting journey, and I'm happy to be here and share some lessons learned with the team.
Yeah, and I got to brag a little bit that both Steve and Kate are pitching in at the Center for USA Lending, and we're just so thrilled to have their participation. And Robert, I got to warn you, you're in a serious minority here, and that you're the only person on this call that didn't work at the Small Business Administration. So I guess you're bringing that.
Did I leave? You want me to? Is this a
you got to
club?
stay. You bring the outside perspective. But
excellent.
Thinking about this segment, this podcast, to be working in the federal credit community right now. We're still cleaning up from the aftermath, of the COVID crisis. So what a couple of terrific guests that were on the front lines of pandemic response back in 2020, 2021. And that's what I was hoping we could kick it off, talking about what life was like in those early days of the pandemic at SBA.
Kate, you want to kick it off, or should I jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick it off.
Go ahead.
In the early days, as you remember, Congress's direction of everyone was speed over everything, right? And so Steve and I like to say 13 years worth of lending was done in 13 days. And that really exposed a lot about the existing systems and processes and staff that we are both, charged with addressing. But Steve, first and foremost on the technology, why don't you share a little bit about what that was like in those early days and how you were able to get the volume that you did out the door?
For sure. So I think, first off, there's always that marriage between kind of the policy, the signatures, and then the execution that we're all tuned into in this federal credit world. And to kind of put things in perspective, you think about the CARES Act legislation is signed March 27th, and then the expectation was 7 days later we would be launching. For a massive program like that, it was a lot of...
And we're talking specifically about the Paycheck Protection Program.
Paycheck Protection Program, yes. And, 13, as Kate mentioned, 13 days later, we had processed 13 years of loans, $350 billion. So a lot of the typical things that we do over the course of a year had to be condensed into a week. and really coming up with it. But I think the key to what Kate said was the real KPI was about speed. And we looked at ourselves at that point as almost like first responders, as if we can take ourselves back to that time frame, March 2020, and small businesses that we knew and loved were shutting down. The idea was about speed. The message from Congress was about speed. The regulations that were promulgated was about speed. In a perfect world, there would have been a more of a speed certainty balance laid out, but that wasn't the time and place we were in. So from a technology perspective, the thing we did first and foremost was to leverage what we had when you have a week. And I really think maybe the underreported story around how we were able to get so much out so quickly was a reliance on API standards that while the rules of the program were being developed, modified, and shaped literally by the day, we still had a core set of data standards that, barring a few tweaks, were going to be the gateway into being able to process loans. So bringing in 1,000 new lenders, bringing in fintechs for the first time, different folks that had never done any type of SBA lending or government-backed lending. The standards were really kind of the holy grail that folks would point to be able to get ready quickly while the rules were changing and adapting.
Doug and I were on the other end of this scenario, and at a public accounting firm whose clients, since Doug and I knew how to spell SBA, were ahead of the curve.
Yep.
It was unbelievable how insights that I didn't think were that valuable overnight became really a treasure to be able to serve people who were suffering. But I have a weird question, having lived through Katrina, and Kate, your relationship with OMB is probably particularly acute here. Tell me who was in charge, or how many people were in charge trying to tell you what to do. Can you give us some sense of the chaos and how you were able to distill the various offers of help, if I can put it charitably, were funneled into actually productive forward motion? Is that a weird question?
It's a great question. And Steve, you were there on the inside. I was on the outside helping before I joined on the inside. But from my perspective, SBA was so nimble and has this culture of rolling up your sleeves and just getting it done. And I feel like while there was this major historic program, Treasury was largely involved in deciding how it was going to be administered. SBA was really the only kind of set of existing infrastructure and nimble enough to take it on without having to start from scratch. But who do you feel like was in charge at that time, Steve, if anyone?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a matrixed operation. I mean, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin certainly took the high level lead. And the way we always kind of framed it was that SBA was the delivery model for the program, since we had existing relationships with nearly 8,000 lenders, that would be kind of the backbone to the distribution. So we were on the delivery side. I was running tech delivery. So it was a very much a matrixed approach. So we would take, high level direction from Secretary Mnuchin that would flow through our administrator, Julita Carranza, and then through to Capital Access. But that also made it a very interesting operation, that it was such a high level and matrixed in that way. But it was exciting that SBA had the existing frameworks and relationships, and Treasury was recognized that. Again, when you're in a time of emergency, there's the perfect and then there's the practical. And I think was part of the approach, aside from some of the things that Kate had talked about in terms of being an organization with a good reputation.
So as you got about a year down the road, so there was another, I'm forgetting the name of the bill. When Biden became president, they passed another round of funding for the Paycheck Protection Program in 2021.
Right.
Did those funds flow more smooth? Did things happen more smoothly in that I don't even think that was I think that was the third or fourth round of funding
Yeah.
for PPP at that point.
It's
Yeah,
funny
you're
it's funny he can't remember this because he's been citing like the specific dates of various
No, I think it
milestones
was
in the
called
whole lending journal.
Yeah, it was called the Rescue Plan Act, right?
Yeah, it was
the
American
first-
Rescue.
American Rescue
American
Plan,
Rescue.
ARPA.
Yeah.
And then you're right, Doug, that there were a few different launches in pre-Biden and Trump administration, PPP,
Right.
and the process did evolve, right?
Yeah.
So when we moved into what we call round two, the tail end of round two of the PPP program, we started to adjust for that kind of speed, certainty relationship, right? So we were in that sense of emergency. We all can go back in time. There was some high profile kind of cases that were brought to light, Los Angeles Lakers, other
Yeah.
groups, receiving paycheck protection funds. So then we started to kind of migrate toward an approach where we started to leverage risk management or proactive risk management, where we would use a 48-hour delay and run a series of proactive fraud checks on applicants to hit against public databases, to hit against LexisNexis, and then probably even more importantly, hit against our existing databases that were growing by the day to see if there were any holds or flags. So
was it recognized at that point that fraud was a problem?
it was recognized at that point, I would say, as fraud was a potential problem. I think we were doing our best to kind of root out things and deal with them kind of as they were coming to the front. But we realized at that point that, after this huge surge in lending, it was important for us to kind of take a step back and try to address both sides. We also were doing some feedback with lenders and different participating partners along the way, and realized that 48-hour delay would not necessarily completely compromise getting funds out to the borrower, and actually would be welcomed by the lending community to kind of sort out some of the noise. There were issues around multiple applicants applying in different places. So that turned out to be a really kind of helpful adjustment that has really carried on into the way SBA continues to handle their programs today. The concept of proactive risk management, pre-origination loan number.
So, Doug, when you look at the macro data from that time, like the vast majority of the improper payments and the potential fraud flags were in that first wave.
Hmm.
The numbers
that's interesting.
considerably go down. And
Oh,
I've always thought a big part of that was the lack of do not pay, and some of those like death registries and other kind of data sets that we couldn't hit against right away, but quickly knew we needed to hit against for future
and you
waves.
did that post
did,
Rescue Plan Act? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So talk more about that evolution. You employed a 48-hour delay. That's a control. Presumably you got access to better data to verify identity, eligibility.
Mhm.
You transitioned to a new platform. Can you talk more about the nuts and bolts of that?
Sure. Yes. So we had started to build towards, obviously we were tapped out, and just in perspective, the highest volume year we would do a normal regular SBA systems, before we started to migrate to the cloud, would have been a $30 billion a year, program. During the peak of the pandemic, in those first 13 days, we did 50 billion a day. So scale was
that's mind-boggling.
yeah, mind-boggling, overwhelming. We were introduced to concepts like, robotic processing agents, processing in the middle of the night, all different types of interesting things that we were kind of learning on the fly. But to your point, it became crystal clear, especially with the notion that what was hanging over us was the fact that these loans also had to be forgiven. Remember, the first piece was originating the loan. The second piece was going to be the forgiveness. And those rules were being developed as we were ripping through the billions. So we knew we were going to have at some point concurrent where we would have forgiveness applications potentially coming in, and also potentially more PPP. So that's what triggered our event to move and shift and bring in vendors and start to shift some of our origination to the cloud through AWS applications that would also tie in to the legacy that we processed the first chunk. So we wouldn't lose continuity, but we would, expand scale, expand speed, and then make things a little bit more repeatable since it was going to have quite a tail.
This could be a 2-hour podcast. There's so much to cover here. Steve, or Kate, I did want to ask you about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, because in addition to PPP, SBA had a direct loan program to help small businesses in distress. Could you just, were the challenges similar with that?
From a kind of a modernization perspective, what I've seen, my observation there, since it came later and since it was built off of the existing disaster program, SBA's direct loan program to disaster victims, is that these pandemic supplemental dollars enabled the agency to invest in modern tech that they would never normally have access to. But it wasn't a one and done. I mean, they can now use it for their regular disaster program and are becoming a model for potential shared service options for other agencies. I mean, it was quite an opportunity to kind of test out something we never thought we'd have access to, and then be able to hang on to pieces of it. And the COVID EIDL program was a big piece of that.
Yeah, and Doug, you can only imagine, to add to the complexity, is we had these concurrent programs that were going on. And as you know, in the federal credit space, these are different funding pots. There's kind of a wall between the two, but common applicants too. So as we started to kind of take a look at this risk management framework in terms of if someone hit a flag, processing a COVID EIDL loan, or on the PPP side, how would we create relationships and between the two so that we could kind of get that sorted out before we dispersed any funds? So that as we got down the road, the one thing I will say, the notion of risk management and potentially flagging borrowers and businesses, obviously, good health makes perfect sense. The execution side of it, because of the scale we were dealing with and concurrent programs and the plane still flying as we were processing, turned into a lot of, added to the complexity. And there was only so many things systems could do before we had to add a lot of labor as well to sort through the massive scale of it.
So Doug said we could have multiple shows on this, but we're about out of time. So, and you dangled this out, Kate, SBA has sort of become the golden child of federal lending. You can do 50 billion a day. You can do a lot more. What do you see as the future of federal credit programs operations and the potential for a shared services or other greater collaboration across federal credit programs? Either one of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say our budgets are not getting any more generous. It's really a struggle to budget for the administrative costs of a federal credit program while you're investing in technology, but ramping up these humans to do the manual processes at scale. And I think the only way is for the federal credit agencies to come together and share infrastructure, share technology, share standards, right? Common standards that folks operate on so that the dollars can stretch further and bring the government into a more modern time. The American people deserve that.
And just quickly to add to it, I think the pandemic for me was one big shared services laboratory to a certain degree. Is that, keep in mind, the PPP program and all of the pandemic programs really kind of used the 7A standards, 7A tech, 7A process. So to a certain degree, it was one large shared service that worked. And then in the future state, one of the things Kate and I really focused hard on as CIO and CFO was to make sure that the expenditures in the tech that we built up during the pandemic would get reused. So today's disaster loan processing, the disaster loan processing that ripped through services on, for the California wildfires, are really on the tech chassis that was used during the tail end of the pandemic. So I think there's some real good shared services models that we already have some good evidence on.
So are we better positioned to deal with the next major crises? Are we a little better prepared? Are we much better prepared?
I think much better prepared. And the other thing, I mean, we talk a lot about tech too, but in a perfect world, the next piece of legislation would also have multiple KPIs aside from speed, right? That there would be a risk tolerance, that there would be a fraud tolerance, that there would be a pricing tolerance, et cetera.
Right. Great.
Great. You've set the architecture for going forward. You're both heroes of the community. So thanks for spending time with us, sharing your experience.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.